Aloha and welcome to the Faith and Family First podcast. On this episode, Jim and I are going to break down the highs and lows of the latest legislative session. Join us as we provide an in-depth analysis of the bills, policies, and decisions that will impact the faith community for years to come. Jim Hochberg and I are going to give you the inside scoop on what really went down at the state capitol. So get ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of the legislative policies. Let's chat about that. Welcome to the show, Jim Hochberg.
Hey.
So, what have you been doing over the last week since the last show? Anything exciting? It was Mother's Day. Did you spoil Janet? Did you spoil your daughters?
Well, my wife and I celebrated our deceased mommies. That's what we did.
Which is a really nice thing to do. I mean, Mother's Day, that's one of the good things about being a Christian is that we love our mothers always when they're here and even when they go home to be with Jesus. And it's kind of why we do it.
I mean, doesn't everybody?
It is. Yeah. So, Jim, let's talk about this past legislative session. So it's been over for a couple of weeks, and you and I, we kind of live and breathe the whole legislative cycle, right? So
over and over.
It's like a badger. It's what's that movie with
Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day. Yeah, I feel like, oh God.
It's like your reoccurring nightmare that you're flying or whatever. People have reoccurring nightmares. It's kind of like that every other,
it
every
really
January.
Is. And I can attest to that because a lot of the testimonies that we submit on a lot of these bills are regurgitated testimonies because it's the same issues over and over again. I mean, obviously it has to be tweaked because every year it's a new bill.
It's a new bill and new words and new whatever.
But it's pathetic that it's always the same horrible issues.
Well, you know why.
I'm sure you're going to tell me why,
Ring
Jim.
the bell.
Ding, ding,
It's
ding,
always
ding,
the
ding, ding,
same
ding, ding.
every year because we keep electing the same legislators. If we want to have different laws, we have to elect different legislators.
I also think that people have to start really holding their legislators accountable for how they vote. One of the things we do in our legislative alerts that we send out is we tell people the bill passed and here's who voted yes and who voted no.
And here's where they live.
No. Well, no, but on the voter voice system, it does allow you to plug in to those legislators if they're your legislators. So, we make it really easy. If you see that your legislator voted a particular way, then, I strongly encourage people to keep that connection with their legislator.
And you can say thanks or you can say, how could you dare? But you should let them know you're watching because there is a value in that.
Yep. And don't stick your head in the sand. I heard a pastor say one time that Christians that stick their head in the sand pose a very tempting target to the devil.
I've heard you say that.
Yeah. So we have to make very sure that we're not sticking our head in the sand. So having said that, a lot of the issues that we looked at this year, they're going to be back next year, even if they passed.
Well, the thing is, though, for easy to guess reasons, the legislature is part of a national party. And the national party all across the country in the last election cycle had some particular issues that had nothing to do with Hawaii. And they were pushing them for election purposes, which weren't needed here. But our legislature came in January of 2023 and ran those issues up the flagpole with new bills which were not needed. And the abortion ones are the ones that I'm thinking of off the top of my head.
Yeah. And even though she ended up voting for the bill, she did vote against it in committee, but when it went to the floor, she voted for it. And that's Kanani Souza.
Okay.
I do want to give her a shout out because during the hearing, she did ask the question, if this bill does not move and nothing happens with it, what happens? And everybody said nothing because it wasn't going to change anything. Basically, and so the first bill we're talking about is SB1. And
which
that
was the number first one bill.
Right,
That's why it's SB1.
And abortion has always been that way. When abortion was passed way back when, it was the first act that was signed by the governor. So, this seems to be a pattern with them that abortion is a very high ranking priority
But
for a
before we
lot
get
of
into the
legislators.
details of what's in SB 1, why don't we talk about, we've done complete shows on it before, but really quickly explain what the status quo was before the bill's SB 1 was introduced, so they can see what little changes are actually being made.
Well, really, the statute that allows abortion in the state of Hawaii, it allowed women who lived outside the state, because they had removed, there was a provision when it was first passed that you had to be a resident. And so when Linda Lingle was governor, they removed that requirement. And that was back, I believe, in 2000 and either
6, I think.
I want to say 2006. Yes. So they removed that requirement, but abortions had to be provided in a licensed facility or hospital. And there were only certain physicians who were allowed to do it. So I think you had to be an osteopathic surgeon or a licensed physician in the state.
But the point of that is, before Roe had the fake constitutional right in the emanations from the penumbras of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, Hawaii already statutorily legalized abortion. So when Dobbs came down in 2022, striking the Roe constitutional basis under the 14th Amendment, nothing changed in Hawaii. We weren't like those states that before Roe had legislation that outlawed abortion at some period of time or some other way. We didn't have that. We had legal abortion.
And you remember back in the 1970s, they already added into our Constitution the right to privacy. Now we
in
know
1978.
Right. So that was also in there.
That was because of Roe.
Because of Roe. And so there.
Do you know that I ran for the CONCON in 1978?
I do know that, but our listeners and viewers, we need to get a picture of you back in those days, Jim.
Oh,
actually,
boy.
both of us, because
I was a college kid.
Both of us were rocking afros back then. I mean, my hair was quite large back before I paid a lot of money to get it straightened. But yeah, that would be fun.
So the point was, though, that before this legislative session started, the Democratic Party of Hawaii didn't need to focus on abortion. There was really no change to the law in Hawaii. There was no infringement on the rights in Hawaii arising out of the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs.
Except that every blue state got their hackles up because of the overturn and wanted to strengthen their laws to protect abortionists. That's really what happened after Dobbs.
And so your legislature spent the very first bill focusing on something that wasn't necessary because for their political ends, it was beneficial. That's my point.
Yep. And if you remember the interviews that were done by people who support abortion after Dobbs was reversed, or when the Dobbs decision came down, you remember they were all saying that abortions are nothing's going to change here. But they also were making claim to the great protection that was already out there because of Dobbs. So it seemed kind of weird that they were touting how wonderful our law was, but then in very few short months, right, they have to go in here and strengthen the laws to protect, and really it's to protect abortionists. That's really, they want to say that abortion's about protecting women, but the biggest part of this bill.
But there were two bills at the beginning.
Right.
SB 1 was about letting people with lower qualifications do the abortion.
Right. The advanced practice registered nurses. Correct.
And then that other bill, the number of which escapes me, was all about protecting abortionists.
I want to say it was SB 864,
something
867,
like that.
something
But then
like
they
that.
merged them into SB 1, and that's why I wiped that other number out of my memory.
And it was quite a large bill.
It was.
So let's just briefly talk about some of the changes they made, right, that came into the bill. So the first thing they did in the bill was they clarified that the state shall not deny or interfere with a pregnant woman's right to choose. One.
Individual. It didn't say women, did it?
Pregnant persons.
Yes. Because we know.
Because men can get pregnant, yes.
My pencil can get pregnant.
Jim Hochberg. So they don't want to interfere with a pregnant person's right to, one, obtain an abortion, or two, if necessary to protect the health of the patient, terminate the pregnancy. And it defined abortion and the non-viable fetus. And you totally honed in on that, right? To watch that very closely. The other thing that it did is it prohibited a covered entity from disclosing information relating to reproductive health services. Now, they defined in the bill what protected reproductive health services are, and it means, and I'm reading directly from the final version, medical, surgical, pharmaceutical, counseling, or referral services relating to the human reproductive system, including, and Jim's favorite terminology, but not limited to, services relating to pregnancy, contraception, or termination of a pregnancy that are protected under Hawaii state constitution or otherwise lawful under the laws of this state, or that would be constitutionally protected or otherwise lawful. So,
Yep. So basically, what was driving the need for this little change about what license you had to have to perform abortions was that doctors and advanced practice nurses really didn't want to do abortions. And so they had to go down the food chain to the next level. I forget what they're called. What are they called?
Advanced practice registered nurses.
No, under them.
Physician assistants.
The physician assistants can now do it. And when physician assistants don't want to do abortion, then they're going to go down to veterinarians. And when the veterinarians don't want to do it, they'll go to gardeners.
And that was the point I made at the beginning. Just because a bill passes, it does not mean that we're done. And we
Correct.
said that even when same-sex marriage was passed. We said just because this is passing does not mean we're not going to be fighting. And here we are all of these years later, and all of these things we're seeing are connected like a spider's web. And that's why we want people to stay plugged into what's happening. Now, I'm not going to go into all the individual other things.
Before you change topic,
I'm not going to change topic. I mean, about the same bill.
I did want to propose why it's necessary for lower qualified abortion providers to be allowed to do abortions.
Because doctors don't want to do it.
Well, it's not that other people don't want to do it, because if they didn't want to do it, then we could just not have it.
They don't. There's not enough.
No,
there's
but
not enough
you're
physicians.
not listening.
I am listening.
Who benefits from abortions happening, and who doesn't benefit when abortions don't happen?
I'm sure you're going to tell us.
Planned Parenthood.
Well, yes.
Of the greater Northwest and Hawaii.
Yes.
So I think it's Planned Parenthood that's constantly striving to get the requirement to perform abortion services down the food chain on the licensing status from doctors all the way down. And they're going to keep going down because they don't get money if nobody's going to do them.
Well, and I think we need to do a show very soon on the money that does come in locally to Planned Parenthood, because it's not hidden information, right? They apply for grants. They get federal grants. They get money from the legislature. They get money from Medicaid, which is our tax dollars, right? So there's all kinds of ways that Planned Parenthood is rolling into money. So you're right. I mean, it benefits them no matter what. Now, if somebody on the other side was part of this conversation, they would jump in and say, but Planned Parenthood also provides all these other services. But that's
we're
what
not
I'm saying.
talking about the other
Well,
services.
let's look, though. Let's look. If they are, then that's something that you would promote, correct? Obviously, if you're doing all these great services.
No, I would close Planned Parenthood because they kill babies.
Well, no, I know. I mean, if you're them and you're promoting all the good work you're doing in the community.
If I was them, I would turn my life over to Jesus and get rid of Planned Parenthood.
Yes, Jim, and everybody listening agrees with you on that. Okay. So anyway, the other thing that SB 1 did was it added all these protections for abortionists in the state. And I'll let you kind of get into your overall thought on that. But before you do, the other thing that it did was it amended the definition of medical care and services so that a minor can have an abortion.
Well, because
now, here's
an
the
individual can have an abortion.
Well, no, what it was is, so under Chapter 577A, that is the legal capacity of minors regarding medical care. So they were already able from 14 to 16 to get all kinds of care. But what they did was they took off something that was, and this is why there was some misinformation out there. Minors could already access abortions. And in fact,
not all minors, 14
not all,
and
14
older.
through 16 is what I'm talking about. And even the Planned Parenthood site, when you're asking questions, who can get abortions in Hawaii? They went out of their way to say minors between 14 and 16 can do it. So it was already there. But what they did, and maybe it was because they wanted to make it absolutely clear that a 14 and 16-year-old, 14 could get it. So what they did was, in the definitions portion, it said in there originally, right, that Okay, so this was the sentence. Medical care and services means the diagnosis, examination, and administration of medication in the treatment of venereal diseases, pregnancy, and family planning services. But there was a sentence that said, it shall not include surgery or any treatment to induce abortion. Now, taking a pill is not surgery.
Correct.
So they were able to do that. So what they did in this bill was they struck off, it shall not include surgery or any. So they really threw the doors open. I mean, the doors were already open, but this time they opened the doors. Now they have lights, strobe lights, inviting everybody to come with signs pointing, saying, come. So it was already allowed, but now it's very clear what's allowed in that process. So why don't you talk briefly about the protection of abortionists, because that's really the meat of this bill.
That second bill was addressed at this topic, and when they folded it into SB1, it fundamentally changed SB1's character,
right?
Because now it was two bills in one. So that first bill was the SB1, and then the second one was saying, you know what? We're really angry that Texas has passed a bill as a state that allows family members of people who get abortions, where the person who gets the abortion suffers something or the family member has some kind of injury, they want to make a lawsuit, right? Texas said, we're not going to make it a crime to do abortions. What we're going to do is make it a civil cause of action, and not just the pregnant individual can bring the claim, but family members, other people that are impacted negatively by that abortion. And so the legislature in 2023 decided to make sure that somebody in Texas who was here somehow getting an abortion and went back and the lawsuit got filed over that abortion, that the court system in Hawaii would not participate in claims against the abortion providers from Hawaii that may have done something really terrible to somebody in Texas by not accepting subpoenas, not enforcing judgments, not requiring testimony to be given. And the thing about that, and what the crux of my testimony on that part of the legislation was, before 1789, when the Constitution was adopted, America was a country without a constitution because it became a country in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence. And in order for these new colonies that became states in 1776 to have a country, they had something called the Articles of Confederation. And so I explained to the legislative committee members the Articles of Confederation failed miserably, which led to the need for the Constitution, because the Articles of Confederation permitted the states, or didn't inhibit the states from fighting with each other over economic and jurisdictional and other issues, which we don't know about now because the Constitution's been around for 200 and something years, where they're not fighting against each other. It's called the Full Faith and Credit Clause in the U.S. Constitution, which absolutely requires, to solve that particular problem, that states must accept all judgments, all contracts, all court proceedings, all legal relationships that's in one state valid. It has to be valid in another state unless it somehow violates the public policy that's been existing in the second state. This came up with same-sex marriage. If one state allows same-sex marriage, do other states have to accept the marriage or not? That's the Full Faith and Credit Clause. So I explained this to the legislative committee, and it kind of went in one ear and out the other because they passed it anyway.
Yeah, well, and I'm going to tie in this bill to the other bill you're going to talk about in a very interesting way. So,
okay, well,
so
we're
stay
down
tuned
to 8
for that.
minutes.
Well, stay tuned
Wow.
for that. Yeah, I'm going to go very briefly through so you can get into yours. So, other life bills. There was a bill that was going to establish the Prevent Suicide Hawaii Working Group, which they're already there, but they were going to make it permanent. and they were going to add like Native Hawaiians and Polynesians into this. And this is to reduce the number of suicides in Hawaii. But that bill ended up in conference committee and it didn't move. So the reasons that it ended up not moving, I don't know. This was a good bill. We testified in support of this bill. We've testified on several bills that would reduce suicides in Hawaii. So I do think it's funny that the legislature on one hand talks about reducing suicides, and then on the other hand, they keep expanding the Our Care, Our Choice assisted suicide law to allow, just like what they did with abortion, let's lessen the amount of people, or not lessen the amount of people. Let's lessen the licensure. No, it's not even lessening the licensure. It's just having doctors that are less qualified, although they would argue that they're qualified.
Well, why don't we just suggest to the legislature, if they want to reduce the number of suicides, treat suicide like it was an AR-15 and just ban it. Ban suicide.
Well, that's going to be a nice segue into the bill you want to talk about. But I do want to just briefly say that, so the bill ended up on it's on the governor's desk right now. So it ended up passing, and it's going to do a couple of things, but two things I want to hone in on. One thing it's doing, when they passed the bill, they said it was the strongest in the nation in protections.
When they passed the physician-assisted suicide bill.
Yes.
Before this year.
Yes, before this year. So this year, what they're doing is they're reducing from 20 to 5 days the mandatory waiting period. But
and what are you waiting for to make sure you really want to kill yourself?
But that's laughable because they also added into this bill, they're waiving the mandatory waiting period if the doctor feels the person is not going to survive the 5 days.
And the interesting thing is, people who are terminally ill, which is still a basic requirement, don't have an expiration date. They could live for years.
No, and that's one of there are many doctors who oppose assisted suicide in all forms, but doctors tend to not weigh in so much on this bill. Most of the time, I think it's because they're busy. They're working. They have practices. The doctors that come to testify tend to be the retired ones.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes me laugh.
I don't think it's that they're busy. I think they don't want their practices to be terrorized.
That's part of it, Jim, but doctors have told me that they don't have the time.
Well, that's a better excuse than I'm a chicken.
Well, no, I think it's honest. Remember that a lot of times they're only given 48 hours notice.
Yeah.
And so it's not like they can drop everything and write a bill and then to show up and testify when you don't know how long it's going to be or when they're going to call you. I mean, let's say that both are true. Okay. So anyway, that's on the governor's desk. And then finally, there was that constitutional amendment bill that they want to enshrine, this reproductive freedom into our state constitution. Now that bill, it passed the Senate. And when it crossed over to the House, according to Hawaii law, they have to notify the governor that there's a constitutional amendment bill that's moving. And so the House did notify the governor that there is going to be a constitutional amendment bill. And that was done on March 13th. But then it was never heard in any of the House committees. So that bill could pick up right where it left off next session. But you and I are going to continue talking about the dangers of this bill so that if it does pass next year, people are already ready to vote no. Well, we can't say vote no yet. We don't know how they're going to word it, right?
No, that's true.
We're assuming that it's going to be vote no on whatever that amendment is. But we'll keep you posted on that. So, Jim, why don't you tell everybody what's happening with the gun legislation bill? Because a lot of people are interested in that.
So last year in June, the U.S. Supreme Court in the Bruin case made a ruling that until 50 years ago, everybody would have gone, duh, that the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms actually means the right to have guns for personal use in your home, keep them, and bear them outside the home for self-defense. Well, Hawaii had long not been allowing concealed carry permits, licenses. And in 2019, I think, I filed a lawsuit here on that because Second Amendment is the Second Amendment. And when the Bruin court, the U.S. Supreme Court out of New York case ruled, as I just explained, it took me from June last year to November of last year to get an actual judgment out of the state of Hawaii and the city and county of Honolulu saying that the prior law was actually unconstitutional and not enforceable. Hence, now we have concealed carry rights in Hawaii. And so right after that, between November and the end of January, City and County of Honolulu and the state legislature came up with bills to basically say these are all the places that you can't carry your permit if you get to carry, or can't carry your firearm if you get the permit to carry it. And these are all the ways that we're going to make it really hard on you to get the license to carry the firearm. And so just like New York and New Jersey after Bruin, Hawaii did the same thing. The lawsuits have been filed in New York and New Jersey. The Supreme Court has announced it's ready to review when the circuit court comes up with its position. So anyway, my co-counsel from Los Angeles on the case that we did here is Michelle and Associates. And we are ready, willing, and able to file a lawsuit against the constitutionality of Senate Bill 1230. But we need financial support. And the Second Amendment Law Center, which is the number 2, ALC.org, is a charitable organization that people can go online, click the Contribute to Hawaii button, and make contributions for a tax-deductible donation so that we can challenge this and not have to wait for the U.S. Supreme Court to, resolve the New York and New Jersey. Anyway, so that's what your legislature was doing this year. They were jumping all over your rights.
Well, and it's interesting because when you testified at the Capitol on Senate Bill 1167, which was the constitutional amendment bill, and you were saying that because of the way that it was worded, this could mean that kids as young as 11 or 12 could actually access abortion because of reproductive freedom, right?
Well, any individual's right to reproductive freedom. There's no age limit.
And Senator Carl Rhodes called you up and said, but isn't that the same with the gun amendment? Because on the Second Amendment, they're not allowing 10-year-olds to hold guns, and yet you owned him. What did you say?
Well, it just so happened that there are cases in federal courts all around the country where people are challenging, after the Bruin case, these age restrictions, whatever they are in the different states, 18, 16, 14, whatever. And the Supreme Court is upholding the Second Amendment like the Supreme Court upheld a right to abortion in the 14th Amendment.
So having said that, it means that if Senate Bill 1167 passes and people say yes, and they allow reproductive freedom to be added into our Constitution, then there'll be lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, because there will be people saying that I'm this age and I have a right to an abortion based on
or an individual. It's not a woman.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
It's an individual.
So that's why you, as our listeners and viewers, have to stay plugged into the conversations Jim and I have, because you're not going to hear these conversations anywhere else. So make sure you like this video, you share it, you subscribe, hit that notification button so you'll know every time we upload a new video. And stay tuned, because next week Jim and I are going to tell you where Hawaii stands on the U.S. World News stats on what's it like living in Hawaii. So stay tuned for that. We'll see you next week. Mahalo, everybody.
Aloha.